We're diving deep into a really fascinating and honestly pretty fiery theological debate that got its start in, of all places, the comments section of a YouTube video. And this isn't just some simple disagreement. It's a major clash over biblical interpretation, personality, and even integrity, all centered on one of the biggest topics you can imagine: marriage.
And it all kicks off with this one sentence. It was posted by a Torah teacher named Pete Rambo. Right away, he's not just saying he disagrees with another teacher. No, he's straight up accusing them of deceit. And by using that phrase, just justice you shall pursue, he immediately frames this whole thing as a serious moral issue. This really sets the stage for a conflict that's going to be about way more than just theology.
So, let's meet our key players. In one corner, you've got Pete Rambo, and he's the one launching this big multi-part critique. And in the other corner, you have Rico Cortes, a really well-respected teacher. It was his video on marriage, featuring his guest Dr. Mark Shavalas, that became the flashpoint for this entire controversy.
Now, to really wrap our heads around this, we got to go back to the original conversation. See, Cortes was tackling a very real-world issue down in the Dominican Republic. Can believers get divorced and then remarry? It's a question a lot of people have, right? But that discussion quickly spiraled into a much bigger debate about the very definition of marriage itself.
And that brings us to the first major point of conflict. We're not just talking about modern rules here. It all comes down to what the ancient scriptures actually say about divorce. And on this point, the two sides are, well, they're worlds apart.
Okay, so this gets us right to the scriptural heart of the whole thing. Jesus' words on divorce in the book of Matthew. Both sides are looking at the exact same passage, but they're walking away with completely different takeaways. So what is really being said here? So here's where you can really see the split. According to Rambo's critique, Cortes' side focuses on monogamy as the ideal that Jesus is talking about. But Rambo thinks that completely misses the point. He argues that Jesus is talking about the unbreakable nature of marriage and, even more specifically, the horrible injustice of a man just sending away his wife without a proper legal certificate of divorce. Without that paper, she'd be left in total social and legal limbo. So for Rambo, it's an issue of justice, not the number of spouses.
And this whole fight over divorce, it naturally leads to an even bigger, more fundamental debate. Because if you can't agree on how a marriage ends, it's probably because you don't even agree on what a marriage is to begin with.
Here it is. This is the position that's being challenged. As Cortes' guest put it, the ideal is one man and one woman, straight from Genesis. I mean, that's a view that most of us in the Western world would recognize in a heartbeat. But here's where Rambo drops a bombshell. He claims this familiar idea isn't actually biblical.
And this is the critical distinction Rambo is trying to make. He claims that the whole one man, one woman ideal isn't actually a command from the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. He argues it's really an inherited tradition from Greco-Roman culture. And by treating this cultural idea as divine law, he says, teachers are basically importing a man-made doctrine that hides what the Torah actually allows. And for him, that ultimately undermines the authority of Scripture itself. And this is where the argument really escalates. For Rambo, this isn't just about a bad interpretation anymore. He sees this as a direct attack on the actual heroes of the faith, the biblical patriarchs. This quote right here gets to the heart of Rambo's frustration. In his original video, Rico Cortes himself admits that the Torah doesn't actually forbid polygamy. That's a man having more than one wife. For Rambo, this is a huge moment of truth, but he argues that almost as soon as he says it, Cortes and his guests start to walk it back and undermine that very statement.
So this is the central contradiction that Rambo hammers on. He's basically saying, hey, you can't have it both ways. If the Torah, God's own law, doesn't forbid something, then how can a teacher turn around and condemn it as chaotic, lustful, or just plain wrong? To Rambo, that's just adding your own human opinion on top of divine law.
And these are the men that Rambo claims are getting thrown under the bus. I mean, we're talking about Abraham, Jacob, King David. These aren't minor characters. They're the pillars of the faith. Rambo's argument is that when their family structures, which included multiple wives, are painted as sinful or embarrassing, it dishonors the very men that God himself chose and blessed. This question is Rambo's core challenge. Over and over again in his critique, he asks this one simple thing. Show me. Show me in the Torah where God himself ever calls the practice of having multiple wives a sin. He points out that while God definitely condemns David for adultery, he never, ever condemns him just for having more than one wife. So all of this tension, all this back and forth, it all builds up to the climax of the conflict. This isn't just some academic critique that's going to get buried in the comments section. Now, this becomes a direct call to action, an invitation to a public showdown.
And let's not forget how this whole thing kicked off in the first place, right? It was Rambo's accusation about his comments being hidden. That initial charge of deceit is what takes this from a simple theological discussion and elevates it into a very public challenge. Suddenly, it's not just about who's right anymore, but about who's willing to defend their position out in the open.
And there it is. The gauntlet is thrown down. Rambo isn't just offering his own take anymore. He is demanding a public live debate for Rico Cortes and his guests to defend their position straight from the scriptures and to finally answer his one central question.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, this entire dispute really boils down to a fundamental question that all of us have to face when we read these ancient texts. How do we separate timeless divine commands from what might just be cultural norms of the time? And when these ancient texts clash with our modern values, whose interpretation is the right one? It's a challenge that really forces us to think, not just about what we're reading, but how we're reading it.